The call came just after sunrise. Ethan Calder had already been awake, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment in Milwaukee, counting the cracks in the paint the way he used to count floor plans when architecture was still his career, and not just a memory. His phone vibrated once. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. He almost let it ring out the way he had learned to let most things go. But something in him shifted. He answered. The voice on the other end was clinical, measured, trained to deliver information without absorbing its weight. Mr. Calder, this is St. Vincent Medical Center in Columbus. We're calling regarding your daughter. The word daughter rearranged the air in the room. Leela. He hadn't seen her in 6 years. Not since the court ruling. Not since the night everything was taken from him. She has acute leukemia, the voice continued. Her condition has progressed rapidly. She requires a bone marrow transplant. Preliminary screening shows you are the only viable match. Ethan sat up slowly. For a moment he didn't breathe. Is she? His voice broke before the sentence finished. Is she alive? She is stable, the voice replied. But time is critical. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Ethan booked the earliest flight without packing properly. He left dishes in the sink, lights on, the door unlocked behind him. He did not care. The flight to Columbus felt longer than it was. He stared out the window the entire time, replaying memories he had tried to bury. Leela at 3, insisting on wearing mismatched shoes. Leela at 5, asleep on his chest after a thunderstorm. Leela the day the judge ruled against him, crying as deputies escorted him out of the courtroom. 6 years. 6 years of absence manufactured by lies. The allegations had been precise. Bruises that were never there. Police reports that contradicted themselves but somehow held weight. A temporary order that became permanent when the right signatures aligned. And behind it all stood one man, Victor Harland, his former father-in-law, a pharmaceutical executive known publicly for philanthropy, privately for precision. Ethan had once uncovered discrepancies in one of Harland's subsidiary supply chains. Counterfeit oncology medications diluted just enough to stretch profit margins. Ethan had confronted him quietly. He should not have. Within months, accusations surfaced against Ethan, carefully constructed, legally airtight. He lost custody. He lost his license. He lost his name. And now, his daughter was dying. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, security met him before the receptionist could speak. Not hostile, just alert. He signed forms. He provided identification. He waited in a sterile hallway that smelled like antiseptic and silence. A nurse finally led him to a consultation room. She's 12, the nurse said gently. She asked about you. Ethan swallowed hard. What did she say? She asked if you'd come. That was enough to steady him. Testing began immediately. Blood drawn, samples processed. Results confirmed within hours. You're a near-perfect match, the physician said. Genetically rare. It's fortunate. Fortunate. Ethan almost laughed. Fortunate was not the word he would have chosen for the man who had been erased from his daughter's life by design. He asked to see her. They hesitated, but eventually they allowed it. Leela was smaller than he remembered, pale, tubes tracing fragile lines across her arms. But when she opened her eyes and saw him, recognition was instant. Dad, she whispered. The word hit harder than any accusation ever had. He stepped forward carefully, afraid that touching her might make the moment disappear. I'm here, he said. Her hand found his. And in that instant, the last 6 years felt like a theft he was finally reclaiming. Later that evening, paperwork was brought in for the transplant procedure. Ethan signed everything without reading it fully. He did not hesitate. But as the nurse processed his donor file, something changed. Her expression shifted. She scanned the screen again, then again. Excuse me, she said quietly, stepping away from the room with his file in hand. Ethan watched her through the glass partition. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Then a man in a suit appeared beside her. Another nurse whispered something into a phone. Ethan's chest tightened. He stood slowly. Down the hallway he saw security moving toward the consultation area. Not rushing, coordinated. The nurse returned with a look that was no longer neutral. Mr. Calder, she said carefully. There appears to be an alert attached to your genetic profile. An alert? Ethan repeated. Yes. Behind her, security stopped just short of the doorway. The air shifted, and Ethan realized that the man who had taken everything from him 6 years ago might not have been finished trying to bury him, because some records do not disappear. They wait, and when they surface, they change everything. Security did not grab him. They positioned themselves. That was worse. Ethan remained seated beside Lila's bed, her hands still wrapped around his fingers. He refused to let go first. What kind of alert? He asked calmly. The nurse hesitated before answering. Your genetic profile triggered a federal investigative marker. Ethan blinked once. That doesn't make sense. A man in a dark suit stepped forward. Not hospital staff, not security, something else. My name is Special Agent Rowan Pierce, he said evenly. We need to speak with you privately. Lila tightened her grip. Ethan leaned closer to her. I'll be right outside. Her eyes searched his face. Don't leave. I'm not leaving, he said. Not this time. He stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Agent Pierce opened a folder that looked too thin to carry the weight it suggested. You were listed as a confidential witness in a sealed federal inquiry nearly 7 years ago, the agent said. Then you vanished. I didn't vanish, Ethan replied. I was discredited. Pierce studied him carefully. The case involved a pharmaceutical distribution network operating through multiple shell subsidiaries. Evidence pointed to tampered oncology drugs entering pediatric treatment programs. Ethan's jaw tightened. Victor Harlan. Pierce continued. The primary whistleblower was flagged as unstable after domestic abuse allegations surfaced. The case stalled. Because those allegations were fabricated, Ethan said quietly. Pierce did not disagree. Instead, he turned the folder around. Your DNA was entered into a national database during the original investigation. When the hospital processed your transplant match, the system flagged your profile as active under a sealed federal order. Ethan absorbed that slowly. So I wasn't flagged as a criminal, he said. No. As what? As protected, Pierce replied. Ethan exhaled for the first time in minutes. You've been under protective watch for years, Pierce continued. We believed you were in hiding. I was in courtrooms, Ethan said bitterly. Losing custody. Pierce nodded once. The judge who ruled on your case is currently under review for financial misconduct. The pieces aligned with a clarity that made Ethan's pulse steady instead of race. Victor had not simply ruined him. He had neutralized him, and in doing so, he had interfered with an active federal investigation. Pierce lowered his voice. Mr. Calder, your testimony would reopen the case. Ethan glanced toward Lila's room. My daughter needs a transplant, and she will receive it, Pierce said firmly. Nothing about this changes her care. Ethan studied the agent's expression. It wasn't sympathy. It was strategy. When? Ethan asked. Pierce answered without hesitation. Sooner than you think. Back inside the room, Lila watched him carefully as he returned. Are you in trouble? She asked softly. No, Ethan said. Not anymore. He sat beside her again and allowed himself a moment of stillness. For 6 years he had believed he was erased. But erased people do not trigger federal alerts. They do not carry sealed identifiers tied to open cases. Victor had buried him publicly, but somewhere in the system someone had kept the file open. The transplant process moved forward the next morning. Preparation began. Consent forms, medical clearance, final compatibility confirmation. As Ethan lay in the donor suite staring at fluorescent lights overhead, he felt something unexpected. Not fear, purpose. The procedure took hours. When it was finished, he felt drained but steady. A nurse helped him sit up slowly. Your daughter's procedure begins shortly, she said. Ethan nodded. From his recovery bed, he could see 2 federal agents positioned near the entrance to the transplant wing. Not for him, for something else. Pierce stepped inside quietly. We're executing warrants this afternoon, the agent said. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Already? Your donor alert accelerated everything, Pierce replied. The network expanded beyond what we initially believed. Supply chains, financial transfers, overseas subsidiaries. Victor had grown confident. Power has a way of doing that. And my daughter? Ethan asked. Protected, Pierce said simply. Hours later, as Leela's transplant concluded successfully, news alerts began flashing across hospital televisions in the waiting area. Federal raids, corporate offices sealed, executives detained. One name appeared beneath the scrolling headline: Victor Harland. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. 6 years of silence. 6 years of humiliation. 6 years of being labeled unstable. And now the system that had nearly erased him was beginning to correct itself. But correction is not the same as justice. Justice requires presence. And Ethan understood something clearly now. This wasn't over when the surgery ended. It was just beginning to surface. And once truth resurfaces, it does not return quietly to where it was buried. By the time Lila was moved into post-transplant recovery, the hospital had transformed into something more than a medical facility. It was now a controlled perimeter. 2 federal agents stood outside the pediatric wing. Visitors were screened twice. Staff badges were checked manually instead of electronically. Victor Harland's arrest had not been quiet. It had been calculated. Ethan watched the news footage on a muted television mounted near the ceiling. Corporate headquarters in Dayton sealed. Documents carried out in boxes. Investors gathered outside barricades, shouting questions that no one answered. The headline did not mention Ethan's name. That was intentional. Special Agent Rowan Pierce entered the room just as a nurse finished adjusting Lila's IV line. "She's responding well," the nurse said. "The next 48 hours are critical." But the transplant took. Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you." When the nurse stepped out, Pierce closed the door. "We need a formal statement," Pierce said. "Your testimony fills the gaps that corporate documents can't." Ethan remained seated beside Lila's bed, careful not to disturb her. "Will it hold?" he asked. Pierce understood the question immediately. "Yes," the agent said. "We've been building this case for over a decade. We just lacked the connective witness." Ethan almost smiled. "Meaning me?" Pierce inclined his head slightly. Victor anticipated regulatory scrutiny. Pierce continued. He did not anticipate someone inside his own family noticing supply discrepancies. "I wasn't inside," Ethan said quietly. "I was adjacent." "Close enough," Pierce replied. Ethan thought back to the night he had confronted Victor in his office years ago. Calm, direct. He had brought spreadsheets and shipment logs. Numbers that didn't align. Victor had not denied anything. He had simply leaned back in his chair and asked, "Are you certain you want to pursue this?" Ethan had mistaken the question for intimidation. It had been strategy. Within months, accusations surfaced. A fabricated incident report, anonymous testimony, a hearing scheduled before a judge later found to have offshore accounts connected to Victor's holding companies. Ethan had not lost custody because he was unfit. He had lost because he was inconvenient. Pierce handed him a thin tablet device. "We've linked the counterfeit batches directly to pediatric oncology centers across 4 states. Diluted compounds, reduced efficacy, increased relapse rates." Ethan felt his hands tighten. "And Lila?" he asked carefully. Pierce met his eyes. "We are investigating whether her initial treatment plan was affected." The air in the room shifted. For years, Ethan had carried guilt like a permanent weight. Guilt for losing custody. Guilt for not fighting harder. Guilt for believing the system would correct itself. Now another possibility emerged. If Lila's condition had been worsened intentionally to increase profit margins. Ethan stood abruptly. Pierce remained steady. "We don't have full confirmation yet. But you suspect?" "Yes." Ethan turned toward the window. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. 6 years ago, he had been painted as unstable. Now he was the key witness in a federal prosecution. He sat back down slowly. "What happens next?" he asked. "Victor will attempt to negotiate," Pierce said. "He will claim ignorance. Delegate blame downward. Argue that supply inconsistencies were third-party vendor issues." "And the judge?" Ethan asked. "Already in custody." That detail settled something inside him. The ruling that had separated him from his daughter was no longer untouchable. Pierce continued. "With your testimony and financial trail evidence, racketeering charges are likely. Potential manslaughter counts depending on confirmed patient outcomes." Ethan looked at Lila. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Machines hummed softly around her. He had nearly missed all of this. If the hospital had not flagged his donor profile, If the system had not kept his file active, if Leela had not needed him, Victor's network might have continued uninterrupted. Fate is not something Ethan believed in, but timing he respected. A nurse entered briefly to check vitals. Lila stirred but did not wake. Pierce lowered his voice. "There's another development," he said. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "Victor has requested to speak with you." Ethan let the silence stretch. "In custody?" he asked. "Yes, and he thinks I'll agree?" Pierce's expression did not change. "He believes he still has leverage." Ethan almost laughed. Leverage. The word felt hollow now. "My daughter is alive," Ethan said quietly. "He has nothing." Pierce studied him carefully. "Think about it," the agent said. "Sometimes a conversation reveals more than silence." After Pierce left, Ethan sat alone with the steady rhythm of medical equipment. 6 years ago, Victor had controlled every variable. Today, the variables were shifting. Ethan reached for Lila's hand again. "I'm here," he whispered. And for the first time since that early morning phone call, he understood that this wasn't just about saving her life. It was about reclaiming everything that had been engineered away. And Victor, for all his power, had made one mistake. He had assumed the past would stay buried. It never does. Victor Harland did not look like a man in crisis. When Ethan entered the federal holding facility in downtown Columbus, escorted by Special Agent Rowan Pierce, he expected visible deterioration, dishevelment, panic, anger. Instead, Victor sat upright behind reinforced glass, suit jacket still pressed, hair perfectly combed. The only change was the absence of his cufflinks. He looked smaller, but not defeated. Ethan took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Victor's eyes scanned Ethan carefully, measuring, recalculating. "You look tired," Victor said evenly. "My daughter is in recovery," Ethan replied. "That tends to happen." Victor leaned back slightly. "I hear the procedure was successful. You don't get to pretend you care," Ethan said. Victor's expression did not crack. "I always cared about outcomes." That word again. Outcomes. Ethan leaned forward. "You diluted pediatric oncology shipments," he said quietly. "You adjusted dosages to increase volume. You allowed relapse rates to rise because the margins improved." Victor folded his hands. "Allegations," he replied. "Supply chain irregularities occur in every multinational distribution model." "And the judge?" Ethan asked. "Irregular too?" Victor's eyes flickered for the first time. "That was enough." "You underestimated one thing," Victor said after a pause. Ethan waited. "You believed integrity would protect you," Victor continued. "It never has." Ethan felt something shift inside him. 6 years ago, that statement might have crushed him. Now it clarified everything. "You're wrong," Ethan said calmly. "Integrity didn't protect me. It exposed you." Victor's composure thinned. "You think this ends with headlines?" he asked. "You think networks dissolve because one executive is detained?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. He thought of Leela, of hospital monitors, of federal agents reviewing shipment logs in offices across 3 states. "This ends," Ethan said, "because your own documentation did not disappear." Victor's jaw tightened. "Testify," Victor said softly, "and your daughter becomes the focus of public scrutiny. Media, lawsuits, attention she does not need." There it was. Leverage. Or what he thought was leverage. Ethan leaned closer to the glass. "You already risked her life," he said quietly. "There is nothing you can threaten me with that outweighs that." Victor studied him again, searching for doubt. He found none. 6 years ago," Victor said, "you were desperate to see her. Now you see her because of me." Ethan stood slowly. "No," he said. "I see her despite you." He turned toward the door. Victor spoke once more before he left. "You will discover that dismantling a system does not erase it." Ethan paused but did not turn back. "I don't need to erase it," he replied. "I just need to make sure you never control it again." Outside, Pierce waited. "How did it go?" the agent asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. "He believes he still matters." Pierce nodded. "That belief will fade." Over the next week, charges escalated. Financial fraud, racketeering, obstruction of justice, judicial bribery. Federal prosecutors expanded the case as internal communications were decrypted and offshore accounts traced. One detail reached Ethan privately. Batch analysis confirmed that several diluted shipments had reached the treatment center where Lila was first diagnosed 2 years earlier. The confirmation did not surprise him. It solidified him. Ethan spent his days at the hospital and his evenings with federal attorneys. He gave a full statement. He reviewed financial ledgers. He identified meetings, emails, shell corporations Victor had once mentioned casually at family dinners. Each piece fit. Lila's recovery progressed steadily. Her color returned slowly. Her strength inched forward day by day. One afternoon, she looked up at him and asked, "Are you staying this time?" Ethan answered without hesitation, "Yes." It was not a promise built on hope. It was a decision built on action. The custody ruling that had separated them was formally vacated within weeks after evidence of judicial corruption surfaced. A new hearing was scheduled, but this one carried no fabricated reports, no purchased testimonies. This one carried truth. Victor remained in federal custody, denied bail, and for the first time in 6 years, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not grief, control. But control does not guarantee closure. Closure requires something else. And as sentencing approached, Ethan understood that the final chapter would not be written by rage or revenge. It would be written by what remained standing after the system finished correcting itself. The courtroom was quieter than Ethan expected. No cameras, no shouting reporters. Just a handful of observers, federal attorneys, and the steady rhythm of a judge reading charges that stretched longer than most corporate earnings reports. Victor Harlan stood at the defense table in a tailored suit that no longer signaled power. It signaled containment, racketeering, pharmaceutical fraud, conspiracy, judicial bribery, multiple counts tied to tampered oncology shipments across state lines. Each charge read aloud stripped another layer of control away. Ethan did not look at Victor while the prosecution summarized the impact statements. He did not need to. He looked at Lila. She sat beside him, smaller than the courtroom chairs seemed designed for, but stronger than she had been weeks earlier. Her hair had thinned from treatment. Her posture had not. When the sentencing phase began, the prosecution introduced patient outcome reports, medical data, relapse rates, statistical anomalies traced back to diluted drug lots. The evidence was clinical, but its consequences were not. Victor requested the opportunity to speak. The judge allowed it. Victor stood, composed but pale. "I built a company that saved thousands," he began. "If mistakes were made, they were systemic, not intentional." Ethan felt Lila's fingers tighten around his. "Mistakes." That word again. Victor continued, speaking about shareholder pressure, regulatory complexity, supply chain unpredictability. He did not say the word children. He did not say the word risk. He did not say the word choice. When he finished, the courtroom remained silent. The judge spoke carefully, methodically. Profit does not excuse harm. Influence does not excuse manipulation of the legal system. You engineered a framework that prioritized margin over human life. The sentence was long. Long enough that Victor's expression finally shifted from calculation to comprehension. As federal officers stepped forward to escort him out, Victor glanced once toward Ethan. There was no apology in his eyes, only disbelief that the system he had once steered had closed around him instead. Ethan did not nod. He did not acknowledge the look. He turned his attention back to Lila. Weeks later, custody was formally restored, not through negotiation, through documentation. The prior ruling was vacated entirely due to judicial corruption. Ethan's record cleared, his professional credentials reinstated pending review. For the first time in 6 years, there were no conditions attached to fatherhood. He moved into a modest home near Lila's follow-up treatment center. He declined interviews. He ignored requests from journalists who wanted a statement. His focus narrowed to routines, morning check-ins, medication schedules, school tutoring at the kitchen table. Lila regained strength gradually. There were setbacks, fatigue, follow-up tests that kept Ethan awake at night, but the transplant held. One evening, months later, Lila stood at the window watching snow fall for the first time since her discharge. "Are we safe now?" she asked quietly. Ethan walked over and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said, not because the world had changed completely, but because the structure that had endangered her was dismantled. Victor's network fractured after his conviction. Subsidiaries dissolved, assets seized. Investigations expanded into affiliated boards. What had once been insulated by wealth was now transparent under federal scrutiny. Ethan understood something clearly. Justice had not arrived as revenge. It arrived as exposure. Victor had built an empire on the assumption that records could be rewritten and witnesses discredited. He had underestimated permanence. Data persists, truth resurfaces, and integrity, while not protective in the moment, becomes irreversible when documented thoroughly. Ethan tucked Lila into bed that night the same way he had when she was small. Slower now, more deliberate. "Dad?" she said softly. "Yes?" "You came." He smiled. "I always was going to." When he turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, the silence felt different than it had 6 years earlier. Not empty, secure. The man who once controlled courtrooms and corporations now occupied a numbered cell. The father who had been erased now stood where he had always belonged. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.